There is a particular kind of silence that follows the question, "So, are you seeing anyone?" You know the one. It arrives at holiday dinners, in the pause after a coworker mentions their anniversary, in the split second before a dating app notification lights up your screen like a tiny accusation. Somewhere along the way, without a single person ever saying it outright, you learn to hear that silence as a verdict. Not yet. Still waiting. Still incomplete. But what if the verdict is wrong? What if the entire story you were handed, that a partner is the missing piece, that solitude is a sentence to be served until love shows up and sets you free, was never true to begin with? What if it was simply the loudest story, repeated so often it started to sound like fact? Think about how thoroughly this idea has been built into the walls around you. Every film that ends the moment two people finally kiss, as though the story stops mattering the second someone is chosen. Every song built around longing for a person who hasn't arrived yet. Every wedding invitation that assumes you'll need a +1, as if arriving somewhere on your own is a logistical problem to be solved rather than a perfectly whole way to exist. There's a name researchers use for the quiet stigma attached to being unpartnered, the assumption that if you're single, something in you must need fixing. It rarely announces itself directly. It shows up as a sympathetic tilt of the head. A slightly too eager introduction to someone's cousin. A well-meaning, "your person is out there," that somehow implies you are currently incomplete without them. And here is what that steady, low-grade pressure actually does to a person over time. It teaches you to distrust your own instincts. You start to wonder whether the hollow feeling in a relationship that isn't right, the sense that you're performing a role instead of living a life, is just something you're supposed to push through, because surely almost anyone is better than no one. That is the quiet lie underneath the loud one. And people build entire decades on top of it. They stay in relationships long after the reasons for staying have expired, trading their own becoming for the comfort of a label. They spend enormous energy managing someone else's moods, someone else's insecurities, someone else's version of who they should be, while the quiet voice inside them whispering, "This isn't right," gets buried under the noise of simply not being alone. If you are watching this and some part of you just recognized itself, you're not broken. You're paying attention. Let's talk about what actually gets surrendered when a person builds their entire foundation on another person's presence, because it rarely happens all at once. It starts with time, not the hours spent together, which are visible and countable, but the hours spent maintaining the relationship. The negotiating, the smoothing over, the low hum of managing another person's inner weather. Researchers who study solitude have found something striking. People in relationships spend far less time in what's called deep solitude, the uninterrupted, inward-facing stretch of time that actually produces self-knowledge. You don't notice the hours leaving. They just quietly migrate away from you, toward someone else's needs. Then there's identity. Becoming a fully formed person is not passive. It requires sitting with your own contradictions long enough to actually understand them, turning over the parts of yourself you'd rather not look at until they finally make sense. That kind of internal excavation is difficult enough alone. When your energy is constantly divided, when you exist as we long before you've finished discovering I, that work gets postponed indefinitely. Ask anyone who has come out the other side of a long relationship what they learned about themselves during it, and more often than you'd expect, the honest answer is quiet, not much. There wasn't room, and then there's the part people are least willing to admit out loud, the performance. When you care deeply what someone thinks of you, you begin editing yourself without even noticing. You round off the edges they seem uncomfortable with. You quiet the ambitions that make them nervous. You get smaller, safer, easier to predict, because somewhere along the way the relationship itself became the thing you were protecting, and protecting it meant managing yourself. There's an old image worth borrowing here. Imagine the mind as a private inner room, the one place meant to remain entirely yours no matter what happens outside its walls. Most people, without realizing it, hand the key to that room to someone else and call it intimacy. Then they wonder why they feel so exposed. This is the particular loneliness almost nobody talks about, not the loneliness of being single, but the loneliness of disappearing slowly inside a relationship that looks, from the outside, completely fine. At least the person who is genuinely alone knows what they're working with. The person who has quietly vanished into a partnership often doesn't notice what's missing until something cracks it open, a breakup, an argument, or just an ordinary Tuesday evening, sitting 3 feet from someone they love and feeling, inexplicably, entirely alone. Here's the uncomfortable truth underneath all of it. For a lot of people, relationships function the way any other distraction can, a way to avoid sitting with their own company, their own unresolved thoughts, the unanswered question of who they actually are when nobody is watching and there's no one left to perform for. And the culture doesn't just permit that avoidance. It applauds it. It calls it romance. It throws a party for it. But to actually know yourself, you first have to be willing to keep yourself company. Not the surface-level alone time spent scrolling, half-present, waiting for the next notification to rescue you from your own thoughts, but the real thing. Unfiltered, undistracted, honest time with your own mind. This is the quiet crisis sitting underneath so many modern relationships, two people who haven't finished becoming whole on their own, hoping that combining two unfinished halves will somehow produce a whole. It rarely does. More often it produces two people leaning on each other for a steadiness neither one has built for themselves, a structure that looks sturdy from the outside and trembles the moment real pressure arrives. You've seen this, haven't you? Maybe not in your own life, or maybe exactly in your own life. The friend who disappears into every new relationship within weeks. The couple who can't survive a weekend apart without quiet panic. The person who hasn't spent a genuinely unaccompanied evening in years, and is a little afraid of what they'd find if they did. Being single was never the problem. The actual problem is that nobody ever taught anyone how to be alone well, how to treat solitude not as a waiting room, but as one of the most demanding and worthwhile things a person can practice. So let's talk about what that practice actually builds. There's an old idea, self-sufficiency in the deepest sense, not the ability to change your own tire or file your own taxes, but a rootedness so complete that your sense of okayness stops depending on circumstances outside your control. Not freedom from difficulty, but freedom from needing someone else's approval, presence, or validation to feel like enough. That kind of freedom isn't handed to you. It's built, deliberately, in the exact hours you might currently be treating as empty. Picture someone who spent every morning of their life, before the demands of the day arrived, sitting alone with their own mind, examining their thoughts, questioning their assumptions, asking honestly whether their actions matched what they claimed to value. Not for an audience. Not for a book deal. Just the quiet, unglamorous discipline of a person doing the work of knowing themselves. That's what real self-mastery actually looks like in practice. It isn't dramatic. It's a person, alone, showing up for their own mind, day after day, long before anyone else ever notices. There's a useful distinction worth carrying with you. Some things are within your control, your judgments, your responses, your inner life, and some things simply are not, including other people's feelings, decisions, and presence. The moment your peace becomes dependent on someone else staying, agreeing, or approving, you've handed the keys to your own well-being to something you were never actually in charge of. That isn't peace. It's a truce that can end at any moment. Learning to sit with yourself, genuinely, without the noise, isn't a lifestyle preference. It's closer to a discipline, reclaiming ownership of the one thing that was always supposed to be yours. And modern research backs this up more than people expect. Studies on solitude have found that people who are genuinely comfortable spending time alone show measurably stronger emotional regulation, sharper creative thinking, and a clearer sense of what they actually feel, as opposed to what they think they're supposed to feel. They make decisions from a steadier place. They're less reactive, less easily knocked off balance, less dependent on outside validation to know who they are. These aren't minor traits. They shape the entire texture of a life. Here's what shifts once you build that kind of grounding. You stop entering relationships out of fear, of silence, of an empty weekend, of what it might mean if nobody has chosen you yet. When you do choose someone, it comes from genuine readiness instead of quiet panic, and that changes everything about the relationship itself. You stop performing, because you already know who you are, so there's nothing left to manage or disguise. And maybe most importantly, you stop outsourcing your peace. You stop needing someone else's presence just to feel safe, because you've built that safety yourself, and you carry it with you into every room you enter, alone or otherwise. None of this requires some dramatic awakening. It starts small, choosing, on purpose, to spend real time with yourself without filling the silence. No phone within reach. No noise to soften the discomfort. Just you and your own thoughts, long enough for something honest to surface. It will feel uncomfortable at first, genuinely uncomfortable, because a mind that has never practiced sitting still will reach for a distraction the way a hand reaches for a railing. That discomfort isn't a sign to stop. It's the beginning of the actual work. Sit with it. Ask yourself the questions you've been too busy, or too afraid, to ask. What do I actually want? What do I actually believe, once I strip away what I think I'm supposed to say? Who am I when there's no one left to perform for? The answers rarely arrive all at once. But they arrive. And when they do, something shifts quietly, and it tends to stay shifted. Maybe the longing you've been carrying was never really about being alone. Maybe it was about being a stranger to your own company, and the fix was never another person walking through the door. It was the willingness to sit down, go quiet, and finally introduce yourself to yourself. Being single was never a waiting room. Treated with honesty and intention, it might be one of the most quietly powerful choices available to you. Strength like that has never been found at someone else's side. It's built in the room you're sitting in right now, whenever you're ready to stay in it. If any part of this landed, tell me in the comments, and if you want more of this kind of thinking, subscribe and stick around. There's more where this came from.